Welcome back to another episode of the Recharge Zone podcast. I'm your host, Ann-Margaret Gonzalez, and I'm joined by my co-host, Brent Doty, as well as Thomas Marsalia, EAA Aquifer Protection Supervisor. Thomas, thanks for joining us today to talk about the EAPP, also known as the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program.
Thanks, Ann-Margaret, for having me here today with you and Brent to talk about this. It's a really exciting topic, and so I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Thomas, it's so awesome to have you here today and to be talking about the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program. And Margaret, I'm super excited about this because Thomas and I actually used to work together, and he currently works in that division on this program. So for our listeners, to give them a bit of a background about the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program, it's a conservation initiative started by the city of San Antonio that's funded by a 1/8 cent sales tax and funded by the voters of San Antonio. So the folks that decide on this measure are citizens of San Antonio, and every 5 years they vote on this proposition. Historically, it began in the year 2000 with Proposition 3. Voters opted to use this sales tax to purchase properties outright over the recharge zone, basically protecting properties in perpetuity from development. Further iterations included Medina and Uvalde counties and properties over the recharge and contributing zones. So basically the watershed towards San Antonio. So Thomas, with that being said, can you tell us a little bit about your role today and how the EAA fits into the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program?
Yeah, so one of the main things we do here at the Edwards Aquifer Authority to partner with the city of San Antonio is that we are responsible for the conservation easement monitoring, which I'll talk about, and also we do geologic assessments, which are preliminary assessment before it becomes a conservation easement to rate its recharge quality and quantity and value to the city, if they want to invest their money into that property or not. So going back to the conservation easement monitoring, so first I'll let you know what a conservation easement is. And so really it's just simply put an agreement between the landowner and the city of San Antonio in which they agreed to protect this property into perpetuity. And with that protection comes some conditions that the landowner has to adhere to. Yeah, so that'll prevent, impairment through these conditions to the aquifer of recharge quality and quantity. Though also at the same time, it allows the landowner to continue to use their property in the way that it's historically been used. So that could be agriculture, it could be recreation, it can be hunting and fishing, whatever is happening on that property as it has been, but it's just going to remain in its natural condition. So in the long run, that development will be prevented. And so what that entails for us is that each year we visit each property, which right now we have about over 160,000 acres of conservation easements that consist of about 100 properties. So that definitely keeps us busy visiting each of these properties on an annual basis and, talking with the landowners, visiting with the landowners, getting around their property and just ensuring all these conditions are met. And so also going back to the geologic evaluations, the EAA has a geologist that is in charge of doing these evaluations, going out into the field and evaluating these properties, as I mentioned before the conservation easement is enacted, to determine if it's valuable to the city for recharge quality and quantity. And things that they might be looking for out there in the field are caves, sinkholes, streams, springs, faults, fractures, and also looking for the Edwards limestone at the surface, which of course is what we want to see because that's where water infiltrates into the aquifer. But also the contributing zone is important because that's where the source of that water is in the first place that brings it to the Edwards limestone to infiltrate. So it's all part of a big system that works together, and this program has done a great job to protect that system.
Thomas, I find that just amazing what this program has done over this 20-year period, protecting more than 160,000 acres, developing more than 100 conservation easements, and ensuring that those 100 properties stay in their pristine state in perpetuity. But Ann-Margaret, as you know, and as many others know, the future of the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program is somewhat uncertain in terms of continual funding. But what is certain is continual protection of these existing properties and continual monitoring by the Edwards Aquifer Authority.
Yeah, Brent. So essentially, this is taking us to the next phase of the EAA, celebrating our 25th anniversary this coming January, and implementing things and developing things like the Edwards Aquifer Conservancy, the Field Research Observatory, and the Edwards Aquifer Authority's Education Outreach Center. So I'll be speaking with Roland shortly, and he'll be elaborating on those points. Well, joining us for the first time on our podcast is General Manager Roland Ruiz.
Hey there, how are you? Good to be with you. Let me begin by talking a little bit about the genesis of this idea of the next generation. The next generation is the phraseology that we built around a vision for the next generation of the Edwards Aquifer Authority. And I kind of developed a concept around those words of generation because we've been talking so much about the work of our agency being generational in its impact. We talk about legacy, we talk about long-standing permanence of the work that we do. And so I think moving forward, we have an opportunity to underscore that about our work. We're working for a long-term outcome. As the old adage, we're in a marathon, not a sprint. And so when you look back at the first 2 decades plus of this agency, you can see the legacy work that has already occurred. And you see it manifested in, for example, the HCP, that we have an HCP and we're now 8 years into it. And that was made possible because of the advent of a permitting program, where we were able to permit all the water, we were able to get all the wells metered and registered. And so what you see is kind of a layering. And so the next generation is about that next layer. And that next layer really, what it proposes to be is focusing on the recharge zone and the contributing zone of the Edwards, to pool resources, to create partnerships, to collaborate in ways that lead to that permanence of a better, more sustainable aquifer, because we're kind of taking a long view of it. So unlike what's happened in the first 20 plus years, where it was built on a regulatory scheme with the permitting program and all that, and we had to litigate our way out of those early stages to where we are today. Looking ahead, it's more of a non-regulatory approach. It's really a partner approach. And so I think that we're in the right position to even think that way. Whereas, even just a few years ago, we weren't in that position because we had a number of uncertainties still in front of us. We've answered a lot of the uncertainty and that was there at the creation of the EAA, mainly about what are you going to do about ensuring that there's continuous spring flows for the species? What are you going to do about managing the aquifer in such a way that you can guarantee that? Well, that was a big uncertainty, and we've answered it. And not only have we answered it, we've actually withstood tests to that, in the drought, the 2011 to 2014, which was a drought that many say mimicked the drought of the 50s, maybe not in duration, but certainly intensity. And so we can look back and look at all those achievements and say, look at, we've done something. And now it's time to look at, okay, what else can we do? And so this gets to the part of the mission, manage, enhance, protect. This lets us focus now on enhance and protect. We got the management down, I would say, with the first 20 plus years. Now let's look at enhance and protect, and what can we do? Things that we've talked about that will happen at the field research part, things that we will teach at the Education Outreach Center. All that is built around that common idea of, yes, managing, but also enhancing and protecting. And so the education message is part of the enhancing and protecting as well. So it's a nice coming together of a vision in ways that I don't think any of us could have foreseen this coming. It just happens that it all coalesced at the right time here on the brink of our 25-year anniversary coming up in 2021.
So the next generation essentially is the next phase, like you said, on the cusp of celebrating our 25th anniversary. It's the next kind of phase of our agency, taking it to that next step of, with the EAC, the Field Research Observatory, the EOC, and then now taking on these conservation management practices, not replacing the EAPP because that was its own thing, but kind of just
Right.
moving into the next phase and taking things into our own hands.
Yeah, I think you're articulating that well, that this is the vision for the next 25 years of the EAA. We know when we look in the rearview mirror, we know what the past looks like. Now we're looking ahead in front of us, and here's what we see, that we have more control now than we did back then about how we can shape our future. And so the Edwards Aquifer Protection Program that the city has run successfully now for 20 years, we know has been quite effective in the way that's been implemented. The voters of San Antonio have repeatedly endorsed it, and they like it because I think that the message resonates well with them, that we're doing something proactively and in a way that you're bringing people together. You're not necessarily having to play the role of big brother to achieve a positive outcome for the aquifer. And so we've taken that concept and said, we can do this too. Maybe obviously not on the scale that the city can do it, because the city has the resources through revenues that we don't, but we can do our part. And however that may ultimately manifest itself, we can play a part that complements the EAPP. And should the EAPP ever go away, or the city decides that it's ready to transfer that idea somewhere else, we want to be the agency where that program or a program like that will ultimately live and have a long-term permanence for generations to come. I think that what we can do that perhaps others can't do in that regard is that we can apply the in-house science and data and research that we have already accumulated, and we can inform those processes. We can inform not just policies, but practices across the recharge and contributing zone. And so we know that, the science guys will tell you that recharge occurs in a number of different ways to this aquifer. One of the ways, and one of the most predominant ways, is through those rivers and streams across the recharge zone, and they lose water to the aquifer. That's recharging it. Those streams and rivers, the headwaters exist further up gradient in the contributing zone, way up in the hill country. And so where we think we haven't spent enough time is up at the beginning of the process. And the more time we can spend up there and evaluate and look at what can we do to protect, for example, perhaps the riparian areas around those surface streams, we think that there's a great benefit to be gained in terms of water quality for the aquifer, and also ultimately by improving soils and lands up there, restoring some of the soil complexion of the topography up there, that we can perhaps improve the water holding capacity of those properties, such that water, instead of just running off when you have these storms, will have some residence time there and percolate into the streams or directly into the aquifer. And if not directly into the Edwards, perhaps into the Trinity Aquifer, because we know we're studying the interplay between the Trinity and the Edwards. These are two aquifers that talk to each other. Mm-hmm. And we know that there is a recharge that occurs from the Trinity to the Edwards. And so we've begun to scratch the surface of understanding that. And so the next step in that is, once we start to understand it more, then what can we do preemptively and proactively to ensure that in protecting what happens in the Trinity, we're protecting the Edwards. So it's a lot of moving pieces, but the basic message is what are the potential impacts from other threats that perhaps could put at risk water quality and such. And so the idea of working with people on that issue is attractive to me, because it's an opportunity to bring people into the fold, if you will, into the mission, and not create these situations where we're fighting with people. Like our history back, 3-4 decades ago was always conflict. And so we want to learn from the past, and we have learned from the past. So now we're looking not to stir up conflict, but to stir up collaboration.
So what you're saying is almost the past 20 years of data and research that we've collected, we're beginning to be able to implement that and do new conservation concepts up in the contributing zone and the recharge zone to protect the spring flow that ultimately replenishes the aquifer and so on and so forth. So it's like you said, it's partnering with organizations, agencies, and whatnot to have like a mutual understanding of what we want to gain from this.
Yes, yeah, it's kind of in the world of politics, they like to use the words like a big tent. You hear the political parties say we want to have a big tent and be more inclusive. That's what this is. Our tent is that of manage, enhance, and protect, and we're creating a bigger tent to bring people under, to work with, and we can do that now because honestly we've settled the big issues. We have a long history of litigation. When think about what happened, and that was that here comes the state legislature, and they impose this idea that the water you once were taking out of the ground freely and without any restriction, now you're not going to be able to do that. Well, you can imagine that stirred a lot of backlash, and certainly that backlash resulted in legal action, and we had to get through all that, and we've done that now. And so with that behind us, and as you mentioned, the preponderance of research that we've amassed, and just the knowledge that we've gained of practical of how this resource works, and how we can go back and look at drought years, we can look at wet years and see how the aquifer rebounds and recharges itself, and then the impacts to the habitat for endangered species in the two spring systems. You start to see the kind of coming together in the entire water cycle, and I know that we teach that to school age kids, the water cycle of the Edwards. Well, the part that perhaps we haven't focused quite as much on in that water cycle is the part of the water cycle where the rain falls up on the hill country and ultimately makes its way back into the system. We now have, I wouldn't say the luxury, but the opportunity to do that. And so it's like I've told our staff and I've told our board, it's not going to be necessarily easy because this is a new role for us, but one that we're willing to take on. One that I think people have been asking us to take on. There's been this push publicly as questions about the city's Edwards Aquifer Protection Program have arisen, and what will its fate be? The question has come to us, what is the EAA going to do about this? Don't y'all care? What are you going to do? Why don't you take this program on? And this has gone on for a few years now. And our answer has always been that, well, we're supportive, but we don't have the capacity in terms of resources that the city does, and so we're kind of hamstrung. Well, we're now at a place where we may not yet have the full capacity that we need, but what we're saying is that we're now in a position that we can start to build the capacity because of all the things I've said. We've gotten past all these significant hurdles, and one of them is the HCP. We're past the midway point on this habitat conservation plan, and so the next several years ahead of us have more financial certainty than we've ever had. You look there, you never know what's going to be around the corner, granted, but the risk, we've minimized risk moving forward, I think, to a great degree. So it allows us to be more creative. It allows us to think, as I've said before, more to be more imaginative, innovative. And in doing that, this program will allow us to be more inclusive of other partners in engaging in a mission.
I think that pretty much sums up the next generation of the EAA with the EAC, in conjunction with the EAC, and just all the moving parts that we have, the Field Research Observatory, the EOC, the EAHCP, all of the programs and initiatives that we have are just kind of elevating and moving to the next phase.
The reality that we now have a nonprofit arm to support us gives us this potential capacity. We didn't have that in the past, but a few years ago we started the idea of creating this conservancy. And now it's on firmer footing as we've gotten the gift from the city of the 150-acre tract of land that we envision as being our research park. We've gotten the partnership with Morgan's Wonderland Camp for an education outreach center. So the synergies that have been created as a result of having that conservancy are starting to manifest themselves. And so now we can start to leverage all that. My hope is that we can leverage what we've done to draw more people, whether it's the city, whether it's other agencies, other partners, private interests that share in our belief that the resource is important, the resource is significant enough that we need to make sure it's sustainable for generations to come, that they'll want to partner with us. And what I mean by that they'll be willing to contribute in meaningful ways through resources, through financial and otherwise, to give us some additional capacity within our budget and expand our budget without necessarily just having to look at aquifer management fees to do it, but sharing the responsibility across the entirety of the region.
To learn more, go to our website, edwardsaquifer.org.
All right, y'all. Well, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Recharge Zone podcast. Have questions, comments, or ideas for topics? Well, reach out to us at rechargezone@edwardsaquifer.org.